So great to be here. So I'm Colin, and we're going to try and cover is not just what the podcast is, but just some of the things that we've learned from this. And it's really a look at 5 years of AppSec in a lot of ways. And we've had a lot of really good guests. We've had a lot of really good insights, and we kind of want to share some of that with you. And we've had a lot of fun as well. And I do intend to share some fun with you as well. The podcast actually started at the very end of 2019. Myself and the other colleague that's not here, Chris Dewar, we actually did a podcast up, but we didn't actually publish it. And then what happened was the pandemic happened.
Yep.
And a little bit about HCL, and only a very small bit, we just transitioned really across from IBM to HCL. So we needed a platform to start communicating to people. So our very first season, and this is sort of a very high level view of it, was really about building a foundation for telling people about who we were. And the format we had was we would have 4 episodes every month, which is a lot. But this is during lockdown, so it was a little bit simpler. Most of those episodes were with people from within HCL, but then towards the end of the first season, we actually started getting some really good guests. Our second ever external guest was Tanya, who was a keynote speaker yesterday. And Rob will go through some of the insights from her, but she was fantastic about talking about inclusiveness, about getting security awareness out there. And I know she still champions that, but having those sorts of conversations very early on, we started to realize that we were onto something that was a little bit more than just promoting our software, that we could actually do something that's a little bit different. We also had a couple of speakers who had nothing at all to do with application security.
Which was great.
And one of them being a sports media entertainer, or for want of a better word. But we managed to be able to talk application security with them, which was really fascinating.
There's a great story about that. So
Rob will go into that. So in season 2, we realized that we probably needed to change it up a little bit. It's still during the pandemic, but the very, very first episode in season 2 was just after SolarWinds had dropped. So we suddenly had quite a lot to talk about. And Chris, who's on the panel with us, is really deep into this sort of stuff. So there's a fantastic quote from him about what it is later on. But because of that, we also realized in season 2, maybe it's a reflection of the pandemic and what was happening, but there was a whole lot of things that happened around ransomware. I work in Ireland. I'm based in Ireland. I have an Australian accent, live in Ireland. It's confusing. But the thing about in Ireland, our health system was brought down by a ransomware attack, which absolutely floored everyone in the middle of the pandemic. So it was everywhere. And we got the opportunity to talk about this and talk about best practices of this. We also were able to get into a lot of things to do with working with CISOs, and we were also looking at virtual reality systems as well. So out of our second season, we had a lot more guests, but we also had far too much content and really needed to sort of switch it up. So when we got to our third season, we changed it more to being much more like a monthly podcast and having lots of regular good guests. And oddly enough, it was still an era of looking at things that were radically happening, like Log4j happened at the very start of that, or the end of December coming into this year. And we started to see things that would happen around application security practices and the changes that were starting to happen. Towards the end of this year, we were starting to talk to people about software supply chain, SBOMs, things like that, which had never really had any sort of conversations prior to this. And it's all on the back of what had happened in the last few years prior to it. We also had, I'm trying to think what else it did, the emergence of AI. So we were talking about AI with quite a lot of our guests before Gen AI dropped. So it was, and some of the ways that some of our guests were using AI is really fascinating. We'll go into that a little bit more. And then season 4 is where the supply chain really hit the road. So season 4 was last year. And it's interesting that, you're now hearing things all the time like SBOMs, software supply chain security, API security. All of those things had not really manifested itself to the extent that it had. Some of the guests that we had, a fantastic guest, a woman called Stephanie Sylvester, who, I think that's how you pronounce it. Yep. We met her at an Agile conference in Miami, and she just blew us away. She's one of the most amazing speakers, and she speaks about justice and all sorts of things around using Gen AI in a way to really help and mentor people. It's fascinating stuff, and I know, Rob, you're going to maybe talk a bit more on that.
Dive into her a little bit.
And then this year we've got about 2 episodes we still need to drop, but already this year we had Tanya back. We had a fantastic conversation with her, and we also had the amazing Ray Redacted, if anyone knows him. And he's just the most amazing person to have a conversation with. And what we're trying to do now is focus on leading trends. So we never now talk about our product. We rarely talk about it. It is really out there thought leadership about application security in general. So
perfect.
So I'll hand it over to Rob.
Awesome.
To talk about some of the big themes that came from this.
Yeah. So the way we kind of broke this up, we wanted to share some of the things that we have seen, stuff I'm sure that you're familiar with, right? Some of the emerging trends and things like that. And along the way, mix in some of the things from fun. So things about Ray and Stephanie and some of those will mix in. But kind of the first thing we thought, obviously, right? He mentioned Colonial, the pipeline, solar winds. How many of you heard of the Oldsmar water treatment? A few of you catch that one? A couple of you? So if you haven't heard that one, that was the one that really caught my attention because it was right before the Super Bowl. And Oldsmar is a suburb of Tampa Bay, and so that's where they were hosting it that year. And it was a case where somebody broke into the system and tried to adjust some of the pH balances for the tanks and literally took over a screen, and a guy watched as the mouse moved over, adjusted the content in there and made it lethal, and then left. And when he left and the mouse stopped moving, the operator who just happened to be watching moved it all back, and nothing happened out of it, but it could have been disastrous. And so all of a sudden, what we saw out of the things with the emerging threats was not only are they getting more sophisticated, they're getting more personal, right? And so it's hitting home, and people are starting to be much more aware of it. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have gotten something in the mail that said, hey, you were part of a breach? Right? Yeah, like this week, like this morning, right? Those. So now my wife, right, who her degree is in exercise science, has nothing to do with cybersecurity. She kind of gets me to, oh yeah, okay, this is spam. We got another one. And it's just they've started to become sort of a norm, right? And you go, oh, that's not good, right? If we're just making this part of the thing. The Squid Game rug pull, if you remember that one with the crypto heist. Stuff like that. So we started to see all of these different things and started going, well, what's really going on? Not only why are we having them, but what's happening in the space? What are we doing? So people talking about ransomware as a business and looking at it as a business model, right? And things like that. So that was a big part of what we saw in some of this. And what we've realized is, well, we need to start having better conversations around how do you be safe? How do you get people participating? How do you bring context to security? So those of you that are trying to work with software development teams, most of my career was in the DevOps space. And so if you're not putting things in a context that they understand and can work in, we're having a hard time, right? It's apples and oranges. And so yes, everybody wants to go faster, but they also want to go safer. They just don't know how to do it. And so those are the kinds of conversations that started to spill out from this for us. The other thing that we really started to see a lot more interested in was, DevSecOps, right, and SBOMs and cloud and the supply chain, all of the buzzword bingo. Now, I'm more of a DevOps purist, right? So if you've read the Phoenix Project and know who Brent is, if you have talked to folks like Gene Kim or Jez Humble or John Willis or those guys, they will all tell you that security should have been part of the conversation all along. And that, we were all super happy when OWASP decided to add the third rule in their last top 10 about secure design, even though we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we do that? Is that just threat modeling? Is it more than that? Like you use use cases, but at least the awareness that you have to start the conversation then, not at the end, right? And so that was a big trend that we started to see in this space. And some of the things that came out of it, this is the quote Chris had on SolarWinds, and we loved the reference, right? Because how many of you have played Halo? A few of you? Like, okay, yeah, so we're all dating ourselves now, right? How many of you know what Minecraft is? No, just kidding, right? All that stuff, right? But this idea of like you have an open window on the 400th floor and you're attacking it with a Halo jumper, right? The precision that would be involved in stuff like that. So we get mixed in stuff like that. But now, talking to Ray, right, we'll share a couple of quotes from him in a bit about posture management. Where does that fit in? The fact that a software bill of materials, great. If you can generate one, what do you do after that? What comes next? Okay, I have this list. I have dependencies. Well, there's a pipeline involved. Should we look at that too? How do we correlate these things? So all of those kinds of conversations are now things that we're looking for, right? And trying to bring in experts on and just say, what do we do? And the funny thing about it, I will tell you guys, what we're finding is the fundamentals matter. That if you want to go do all these other things, right, APIs and SBOMs and look at your pipeline and do DevSecOps, if you're not doing the fundamentals well, it's kind of like my football team this year. We've got great skill people. I go to USC, so moment of silence for our season. We're playing Rutgers tonight, by the way, too. But great skill people, but the trenches are terrible. And those of you who ever played football know football's won in the trenches. If your O-line and your D-line are terrible, you're not doing much, and that's a core problem. So we always talk about the fundamentals here. Getting things embedded in DevOps, we're all trying to do that without slowing everybody down and putting things in context, right? So those conversations come up, and I've got some great quotes to share with you on that. And then machine learning and the rise of Gen AI, and I think this was when
I just go to the next slide, and I'll just talk quickly.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
and there's Stephanie.
And one of the reasons I want to talk about this slide in particular is that we started specifically with our product. We were doing cognitive machine learning with our product in 2016, and we missed the bus in the sense that we didn't market ourselves and we didn't talk enough about the fact that we're doing it. We do it for two different things. We were doing it for code coverage when we do static analysis, so being able to actually manage a trace from source to sink and actually find all the bits in the middle. And then also what we call intelligent findings analytics, which is a form of auto triage, marking up findings and marking up vulnerabilities. So unfortunately, everything seems to be AI since Gen AI came out. And a lot of it, I think, isn't quite there yet or isn't ready yet. But what also comes out of it, and I talked about Stephanie before, is when you suddenly come across someone who uses AI in a really, really interesting way, it becomes fascinating. So she's created a thing called Avatar Buddy, and it's really a tool that helps people who are a little bit insecure with their job or are not really comfortable with what they're doing, and really using it in a way to be friendly.
Yeah.
And
well, imagine
suitable.
How many of you have ever tried to rehearse for an interview and would have loved to have somebody to practice with?
Yeah.
So Avatar Buddy helps with kind of emotional intelligence and going back and forth. And what we love so much about her, and like Colin mentioned, we met her at an Agile conference. She actually runs a foundation in Miami for getting people into tech. So women, underprivileged, all of that. She's fantastic. But this combination of emotional intelligence with technical aptitude and putting those things together, right? So we all know that skills matter on the job, but personality does as well. And so helping people navigate that space. And how do we understand that better So just having this avatar that you can sort of talk to and practice on, get feedback from, all of that. So it's called Avatar Buddy, and people immediately think, oh, cure for loneliness. But it's really more about how do we understand emotional intelligence and leverage that in the space. So yeah, she was fantastic for that. And I think the next one is really continuing on this idea of inclusion. So what we started to notice in the last few seasons was talking to people like Charlotte Chang and Ken Fanger and Tanya about security champions. And how many of you have heard Tanya talk about security champions? Right. So you all know that's a culture problem. It's almost never a technical issue, it's a people issue. And so we started to talk about, well, how do we make security more human? And one of the things that we found with Charlotte and talking to her, so she specializes in, hey, the way things are working isn't working. Right? And so I loved her quote talking about we don't take enough into account what it means to be a human. And if we're measuring productivity, and in some places, right, like any parents of like teenagers in the room, right? Like I have a 24-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son. My daughter in her first job, no kidding, they were using Slack to measure time. And if you went to the bathroom, if you went to lunch, right, like they noticed how long you were off Slack, and they were using that in some cases in a punitive way. And I love the fact that you're shaking your head, because I was like, I can't believe this, right? But this thing about like if we're trying to measure productivity and we're all in DevOps and speed and how long does the build take and what was the circle time, right, the lead time and all of the different metrics, if we don't take into account that, hey, we need to eat and sleep and breathe, and we can't all be 100% productive at the same time, like then we're missing the mark, right? And no wonder breaches happen. It's not because people are careless and negligent. Sometimes we're just tired, right? You can all breathe now. It's okay, right? Right? Anybody relate? Can I get an amen, right? Like, so, and her point was great. She's like, we want to make good stuff, but we end up making bad stuff faster because we're under pressure, right? I will not go into the rap version of that. You don't want that. Ken, though, had a really good, and I was listening to this again, like prepping for the talk, and so hopefully you'll get the context on here a little bit. He's written some books on just making cyber more friendly, reducing blame. So if you've been in an agile space and you've heard of a blameless post-mortem, think of that for cyber and a SOC incident. How do we make that blameless? All of that kind of stuff. But he said one of the problems that we have is we've ingrained phrases into our vocabulary about users being the weakest link, or the human is always the worst problem, or the users are the problem, right? And we do phishing exercises in our, still why I don't know, because they don't really do anything, right? But who clicked the button, all of that kind of stuff, all the vishing, the whaling, all that's going on. But he said we've got to this place now where we look at the user more as a problem to be solved than a partner to be joined. And I love the way he put that together, right? That if we are really serious about making security work, we've got to look at our end users as people that we're trying to partner with, right? And those of you that are parents know this, right? If you have a 3-year-old, you don't stand up here talking to them, you get down on one knee and you look them eye to eye, right? So I'm not saying you have to go back to your offices and get down on one knee, and right? But this idea of how do I bring the context down to what they're talking about, right? So that was the thing there. And then Naomi Buckwalter, who some of you may know from LinkedIn, she's a contributor there on a lot. We talked to her just about people skills. And again, this idea of so many students. So a lot of us, again, having adult children and stuff like that, they're coming out and they know some things, but they don't know how to interact. Or they have trouble on an interview, or the personalities, all of that kind of stuff. And he said, one of the reasons we struggle with security is because we're really bad at convincing people that this is important. And why? It's really hard to prove a negative, right? But if we can put things in context of dollar amounts, risk, stuff like that, then all of a sudden it becomes more important. You guys heard in the keynote, right, Tanya talking about, hey, let's put things to where people can say yes or no to the risk and make it there, right? So we're seeing more and more about doing that kind of stuff. And some of you know Vandana, right? So she was the president for OWASP a year ago, right? So she has a company called InfoSec Girls, but I loved where it started. So she was just a young mom trying to get connected and stay connected while raising children at home, started InfoSec Girls to just have more women being part of a meetup group, and it exploded from there. And when she took it to YouTube, that's all of a sudden when the aha moment was like, hey, we can reach people and we can build this thing out. And I love this bit now where she's going, hey, next gen, she started going to colleges and now the colleges are coming to her, right? Wouldn't that be awesome if you've got people in your org that are coming to you first instead of having to chase them down? So it's just building that kind of community. So lots and lots of cool stuff on that. Some great moments. Do you want to hear some great quotes? Some good stuff, right? That's what you came for, right? Like these are the moments. So Steve Mason. Steve Mason, if you've ever been to Los Angeles, he runs a sports radio show in Los Angeles with a guy named John Ireland. So I've listened to him on and off for years, but I'm driving around one day and I hear him say, hey, if you happen to have a podcast and you need a guest, let me know. And I'm thinking, sure, why not, right? This could be fun. This is back in the pandemic. And so I contacted his agent, got a hold of Steve. He's on Twitter, so reached out to him there. And he was like, sure, I'd be happy to come on. And what I wanted to talk to him about was the connection of technology and athletics. And this was right around the time where baseball was big on analytics and that story was showing up. You had some privacy issues with some high-name celebrities in the LA area, so Clayton Kershaw and a few other things going on. And so we brought Steve on and we had an amazing conversation with him about this intersection of how are athletes keeping their privacy, what's going on around them, things like that. You know, the whole celebrity factor, how they have, you know, anybody know what a Finsta is? Right, fake Instagram account? Right, so doing things like that. But then, you know, the fact that the analytics were taking over everything, which is why Maryland, by the way, went for, you know, did a 2-point conversion down 14 last week. I'm like, what? The analytics told them to. The hard drive rate. But then, you guys remember the NBA season in 2020? Where it was canceled and they were doing the whole thing in the bubble in Orlando? And you guys remember that they filled the stands with those screens and had virtual fans? Well, Steve was one of those. And so he told us what that experience was like and the fact that he had to just basically stay in front of his camera because if he left to go to the bathroom or something, then all of a sudden blank screen in the stands and it would look weird, right? So we have all of this. Now, you remember what he asked us?
He asked us lots of things.
Right, but about the tape?
Oh, vaguely.
Yeah, so Steve, in the middle of the conversation, turned to Colin and Chris and he goes, hey, by the way, that tape over the camera, is that a real thing? And he goes, yeah, absolutely, right? So we're like, yeah, that can happen, stuff will go. So we asked him about this the next day on his radio program in Los Angeles. I'm driving around listening to it, and they had a break where they were waiting for a guest to show up. So he turns to John and he says, hey, John, let me tell you about this podcast I was on with all the paramaniacs. And like, okay, you didn't quite get the name right, but that's all right. And he said, yeah, they said the camera thing is real. And then, so his partner, John, starts telling this story about how he's driving around with his wife talking about resorts that they might want to visit. And when they got home, they suddenly had email ads for those resorts that they had not requested. And he's like, things are listening. And so they had a 10-minute discussion about all the things we talked about. And so it was amazing. So you just never know what people are going to do, right? The other favorite one that we had in this space, so security intersecting everything. Right? We're now 2024. I hear there's an election coming up, right? Might be slightly important. Michael Owens was running for Senate in Georgia back in 2022. And so we decided to talk to him about election security. He was running on a platform of, hey, the nation's cyber is not great and we need to do something about it. He wanted to get into Congress to kind of push the conversation along. Unfortunately, he did not win. He's now the mayor of a town in Georgia and working his way back up to try to get it up there. But he pointed out to us that way back in 2017, our election systems were actually declared as critical infrastructure. And his point was, well, if we declare it as critical infrastructure, it might be a good idea to treat it that way. We don't, right? And he actually, I love the other thing too that he said, it's not up here, but he talked about how for every state, their election rollout is the largest IT deployment. And it was like, oh, you know what? You're right. We don't really think of it that way. But that's, so those connections of things hitting. We talked to, from Alacrinet, a guy who was a former hacker who was arrested and spent some time in jail and is now an evangelist on the good side. We talked to him specifically right after the Log4j incident, but it really turned into an open source conversation. And his point was like, yeah, Log4j is just tip of the iceberg. There may be thousands of these. Boy, isn't that encouraging, right? Job security, yay, right? That could exist. But then the question, what do we do? Does this mean that if you're Microsoft, if you're VMware, if you're us, do we have to put money into maintaining every dependency that we're a part of? So getting that conversation started about how do we really play in the open source space, and what do we do, and how do we ingest, and how do we propagate, and all of that stuff. And so any people part of OSS, the Open Source Foundation, a few of you? Yeah, I get all their mail every time there's a Git push. Thank you, that's great, the notifications, but that kind of stuff. And then quantum, right? And Andre Koenig, if you haven't heard him, great quantum expert, good follow on LinkedIn, lives in Florida, but goes around the world talking about the quantum space. And we talked to him about just what's going on there and about encryption and speed and all of that. And one of the things he said that I thought was really cool was about how quantum is binary, right? It's either solving problems or not. And he says, it doesn't just get you a little bit closer incrementally. It either solves it or it doesn't, right? And so that's why I think that's starting to become much more interesting. Ray, I think, gave me my most favorite quote from the whole thing when we're talking about posture management and fundamentals and how it matters. And he was using this example of going to a company and they had spent all this money on fencing and door locks and physical security, but everyone had access and then simple access code. So you'd had all of this stuff. And his point was, it doesn't matter how good your locks are if everyone has a master key. And when we look at the way we handle APIs, when we look at the way we handle role-based security, right? If we're letting people in everywhere, if we're inheriting permissions without really thinking about it, it doesn't matter how good your locks are if everyone has a key, right? John, who is a former CISSP still, but is former working with Cloudflare, and if you know Threadfix, that company, we talked to him about quality and security and what that looks like. And he told us that we all win when we view security and resiliency as just another aspect of quality, right? So I was having a conversation with somebody about that before, but I'm a big fan of making security part of the quality conversation. We're already testing functionally. And by the way, we got developers over the hump of doing unit testing and writing unit tests. How did we do it? We made it the same button push for continuous integration. And then we made it faster. And we used automation to write the test cases. So we start doing the same kinds of things in security, all of a sudden you get buy-in. And it's okay if my build goes from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, no big deal, right? I can find something else to do. It's when my build goes from 5 minutes to 5 hours, right? So making those things work, I think, helps. Some of you will recognize Tanya, right? Chris was famous for asking every one of our guests in the first, 3 seasons?
Like he still
asks them every once in a while. He'll ask them, why is SQL injection still a thing? Right? And it's a good point, right? like we know. But one of the things he also asked Tanya was, hey, what would you want to fix most? Right? You've been in the space a long time. What's your favorite vulnerability you would love to fix? And I love what she did. She turned the question on its head. And she said, well, Chris, here's what I would do. If I could get every single programmer to use input validation where it was supposed to, and they did a good job on it, it would fix such a huge amount of vulnerabilities, it'd be out of this world. She was going to say we'd all be out of jobs, but there were still other things to do. But I loved that idea. And then Matt Krause, and I love Matt because Matt was the CISO of Taco Bell for a really long time. He's now at John Deere. Our kids grew up together. They started in kindergarten. I was at his son's wedding earlier this summer. I did not know that he was in security or a CISO until my kids were in junior high, right? And so I just love the organic nature because you just never know what people know. So in your church or in your community or things like that, right? But when we found out Matt was a CISO, it was like, hey, why don't you come on and tell us a few things? What are we talking about? And we asked him at the time, this was when payments were starting to become really the automated payments, right? So your chip cards, Apple Pay, all of that stuff at Taco Bell. And we had a fascinating discussion around how he loved the idea because he could pass on liability for the payment, because now it's the vendor, Apple's responsible, or whoever's running the payment system. But we asked him what his big challenge was, customer authentication. Because there's Taco Bells everywhere, right? And if you're using a card from Vietnam, but you happen to be sitting in Texas, like, do we ask that question? So who are they really? And then fundamentally, bringing security into the culture, of his business, right? So you don't really think about Taco Bell having a security culture, at least not in the restaurant, but bringing that into everything that they're doing. And now if you go to a McDonald's, a Taco Bell, right, what do you see when you walk in? You don't even interact at the counter anymore. You go to a touch screen, which I hate, right? But that idea of like we've done so much automation, all of a sudden security becomes really important. And trying to get Colin the other day into McDonald's to figure out what he wanted and what he was trying to order, that was fun, right? The payment card wouldn't work. And then he kept asking for a loyalty program, which he's in Ireland, right? It was great. So, other quote from Ray. So I called this one Postures and Pantries because they gave us some really memorable moments. And by the way, fun fact on Ray, I gotta say this, right? His son, Sam, is the world record holder for speed climbing and won a bronze medal at the Paris Olympics and won the entire season. And the reason I know that is because Ray decided to add me to a WhatsApp group that was notifying me at 3 a.m. during the Paris Olympics when his son was competing. I was like, super fun, but really, really great conversation. If you follow him on Twitter, you'll see a ton of stuff about Sam. Super fun stuff, so I'd throw that in there. That's why he's the proud father of the fastest climber in the world. But when we talked about posture management, right at the end of the day, sure, the textbook definition practices to detect misconfigurations, all that. But at the end of the day, it's what we all know: identify, monitor, and mitigate risk. But then he's going, I think about it really as eliminating your blind spots, understanding where you're not healthy, right? What are the things that are going to trip us up? Finding the things you don't necessarily know about. And he analogized it to those of us who are old enough to remember things like TomTom and MapQuest, or if you live in Los Angeles, a Thomas Guide. Like, we actually used to have maps on paper, right? And they told you everything except how to fold them back up again. So if you needed to go to a barbecue or something like that, you would print out the directions and then follow them and hope it wasn't like, hey, look for the big rock next to the shed and turn right, things like that. So the blind spot versus where we are now, right? That kind of thing with posture management. And then John, talking about the supply chain, told us this fascinating story about going to, Kuwait, I think, right? And he was meeting with an army general over there who said, look, my security problem is I have troops on a far border who are getting shelled by mortars and have to worry about mines and things like that. And you want to talk to me about cybersecurity, right? Like, it's a different perspective. But we're talking about the supply chain, and he says it's really a pantry problem. You've got all this stuff in your pantry, all this food, and let's say on a random Tuesday, the FDA comes out and says this certain ingredient is carcinogenic. And now you walk into the pantry and go, where is this, right? What items have it, and what ones don't, and are they perishable, and what do I do, right? And so I love that analogy because it's great. You can generate an SBOM, okay, Log4j, awesome. The biggest problem with Log4j wasn't what do we do about it, it's where is it? We got to find all the places it's actually installed. And oh, by the way, if you're into DevOps, let's make sure we don't reintroduce it. Like, that was my favorite part. Nobody wanted to talk about that, but being a code librarian, I'm like, that sucker's on another branch. You got to go deal with that one, right? Okay, and then the fun stuff. So I'm going to turn it back over to Colin. Sorry.
Yeah, I get to do the good bit.
You'll like this. This is good.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do in particular is we did a lot more of it in the first season, but we try to put an element of fun into it because let's face it, it's the driest material.
We're not that boring.
But we talk about a lot of random stuff, and I typically will bring stuff to Chris and Rob without them knowing what it is.
Every freaking episode.
And it's usually quite funny.
It is.
And I'm going to share. So whether it's better to be a lantern or a limo, I'll explain. So the first one, and this is a discovery for me, so I learned things on it, was Strava art. Has anyone tried Strava art?
Anybody know what Strava is?
Has anyone done Strava art? Yeah.
Yeah, the fitness app. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it tracks runs, hikes, biking. It's a fitness app, right? Yeah. That's Strava. Yeah.
We found this in season 1, or I found this. This is a guy in Brussels who cycled 3,500 kilometers to draw this map.
Right.
And it's fantastic. I mean, you can even see the froth on the top. I mean, when you go into the detail of it, it's stunning. So a little bit about me, and this comes up through the podcast. living in Ireland when the lockdown happened, we were limited to only go 2 kilometers from your house. And that was a problem because I like to run. And I decided that the only way I could get around that was to deliver a newspaper to my father-in-law and his neighbor. And they live 5 kilometers from my house. So I could run 5 kilometers, deliver a newspaper and come back. And I did that for 500 days in a row.
And he made sure we knew about it too.
Yes. But better than that, when I saw this, I said, well, another aspect of where I live in Ireland, it's a place called Waterford. They have what they call a solace centre, and they do a run every year. And it was 2 years in a row where they didn't do it. They didn't do it during the pandemic, obviously. But they gave everyone the shirt to do it virtually on your own and post in what it is that you did. So I did this. I actually wrote the word solace, pretty lamely, I might say. That's really hard to do. That's 24 kilometers of running. And what you don't realize is that down around here is a cemetery, a graveyard. And I had to run through the graveyard in order to make that happen.
Nice.
And during the pandemic, running through a graveyard is not a good look.
No, probably not.
So there's a lot that you have to do in order to make these maps happen. You know,
Yeah.
so
If
you have to run down streets where you wouldn't normally walk because it's maybe not safe. But and then you have to run down and maybe now I have to run back again because if I keep going, I won't make the right thing.
But it's good that you did, because if you don't go through there, it's a grave mistake.
But
So this is the other thing I do to Colin in every podcast.
But there are some better ones than this.
Yes.
This is my best effort. But did anyone ever see this one?
We loved this one.
There's a whole story about it. This is a guy in Japan he obviously didn't do it in one run. But he literally covered the whole of Japan, and he even got a love heart with an arrow going through it at the top. It's fascinating. And I have one more to show.
I love the fact that there's no question mark though, right? So the like if you're going to put this kind of effort in, you're confident.
It's worth looking up. There's a whole article on it. I found one just last week, and this is stunning, this one. This is a guy in Melbourne, Australia, who ran 177 kilometers and drew out the map of the world. Now, this is actually, you'll find this in newspapers and stuff, but it's fascinating. I mean, to even plan that out and to actually make that happen is pretty impressive.
And you would think he would finish in Melbourne, but the little checkered thing, for those of you who know Strava, right, that's the finish line.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's just so random.
So anyway, that was one aspect that we talked about. And there's a theme that goes through it. Now, other things that we did.
Yeah, this was great.
I got sent a list from a friend. I grew up in Australia. I got sent a list of Australian workmates. Has anyone ever seen these before? Is this familiar with anyone? Oh, you'll have fun then. So Australians have very dark sense of humor in particular. No. So these are names that you would give someone that you're working with. So if someone called you a blister or talked about you and said, oh, that guy's a blister, would that be a good thing?
It doesn't sound good.
No, probably not.
We got a couple.
A blister appears when all the hard work is done.
So now you get the idea, right?
So if you were called a sensor light, what would that be?
Anybody want to take a shot?
Something went wrong.
Yeah, here, go ahead.
Something
so
went
we can
wrong?
get on the video.
If that person's around, something's wrong.
Something's wrong. Anybody else?
Check engine light.
Check engine light. I heard
May not work.
may not
What's that?
work.
A complainer?
Complainer?
No, not really.
It's closer.
Basically, only works when someone walks past them.
I do like all the complaining and alert fatigue stuff. Like you guys have been in a sock. you can
Noodles.
tell.
Noodles is an interesting one.
Yeah, this one might be a little
Anyone
tougher.
think what noodles could be? Thomas, yes, I think US use noodles in a different way.
Well, think more cup of noodles.
Yeah,
and I
think
think
more pot noodles,
You'll
yeah.
get this.
It's complex.
Complex. Their brain is loose. That's
I think they're close.
probably confused. Okay.
I'd say everyone in the room knows someone who's a noodles.
Yes.
Basically, someone who thinks all jobs take 2 minutes.
Right? Or how many of you have worked with an agile team? Like everything can happen in 2-week sprints. Right? Yeah.
Deck chair.
I love this one.
Moves things around a lot and does nothing.
Oh, that would be a Titanic
It's getting
problem.
close, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
A deck chair always folds under pressure.
Do you know anyone like this? But don't look at them.
A wheelbarrow. Any thoughts?
Oh, she's so close.
Yeah,
she's
yeah.
so close.
Yeah. You kind of. They only work when they're pushed.
Okay.
So the last two are my favorites, right? So
She's
one of
going
these,
to remember that one for a while.
one of these is really good, and one of them's really bad. So
Well, I don't know. Like they could both be. It depends on which side of the equation you're on.
yeah, maybe. So a limo, as in a limousine. Good, bad? Would you like to? Anyone like to be called a limo?
Think if you're driving.
A limo carries 8 people.
To everyone in this room.
But the last one's my favorite.
Yeah.
The lantern is my favorite. So a lantern is, everyone knows what a lantern is. Yeah? So what would a lantern be? So basically a lantern is not very bright and it needs to be carried.
Do you get the sense that HR teams in Australia might be a little different?
Yeah. So anyway, look, we have time. I have another one, right? So
We're good.
I'm a huge fan of collective nouns. So collective nouns go back to 1846. And this is a passion of mine, and I'm hoping, because there's a room of you might help me with this a little bit. But some of them are really strange. So a melody of harpers, a sentence of judge, a drunk ship of cobblers. And these were all listed in the Book of St. Albans way back. But there's also a whole lot of really well-known ones that people don't realize, like an army of soldiers is a collective noun. A chest of drawers, So here's the challenge. I want to come up with collective nouns for groups of cross-site scripting, SQL injection, phishing, and log forgers. So this was a challenge, and I still think that this could stick.
We're still working on it, because, yeah.
But so thinking to what Rob had said about Chris. Chris always asks people, why do we have so many cross-site scriptings? Why is cross-site scripting still a thing? So it's clear to me that cross-site scripting, it should be a bewilderment of cross-site scriptings. SQL injections, lots of them. A jeopardy of SQL injections.
Will you take one for 1,000?
A rash of phishing attacks. Or a fudge of log forgers. I genuinely think these could be good. So yeah. So we bring that sort of entertainment to our podcast as well.
And there's
Shouldn't
more.
fishing be something like a school of?
See?
A school of fishing? It could
School
be.
of fishing?
Sequel of
Right?
SQL injections.
Oh, see, that's good. I like that. The sequel of SQL injections.
Inception.
Yes. Oh, yeah. But then is it real? That was a freaky movie, by the way.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, and this is the last slide. We're going to summarize. But as I said, we've been going for 5 years, which is amazing to continue with it. We're maybe not as frequent as we were in the start, but we are very enlightened by the sort of guests that we have. Using a quote there from Bowie. But what's really interesting is the sort of things that we summarize in the key topics. So, it's all been about transformation of business, talking about things like supply chain, all of that. If you think about it, what I've got written up here, none of this was being talked about 5 years ago. So the question really is where will we be in 5 years from now? So these are these are all common things, and you probably hear them in every presentation. But 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't have heard most of these terms. You certainly wouldn't have heard AI and machine learning as much as you do. API, yeah, you would have talked about APIs, but you never would have been talking about API security. And we certainly wouldn't have had such an evolving threat landscape as we now do. So it's, for us, it's an onward journey. I don't know if you have anything you want to say on the end.
Yeah, I would say, to the point where there's always going to be new things coming up. There's always going to be challenges ahead that we're finding. But what's been interesting to me on this journey and talking to so many different people, like three things has just come up again and again and again. And it's that the fundamentals matter. So doing the basics well is what enables you to do all the other things well. The context matters. So how we talk about things, where we place vulnerabilities, how we're trying to adjust, context matters amazingly. And then surprisingly, like my favorite question to ask most of our guests is, what would you say to students and people who want to break in? And so the next generation matters, right? Going back to Matt, when Matt and I were spending a 4th of July one year, right, and I found out, oh, you're the CISO for Taco Bell. We're sitting there just poolside, kind of eating hot dogs and talking about this stuff. One of the things he told me, I never forgot, because, Rob, when I was becoming a security leader, it was like Hansel and Gretel, right? We were just out in the forest trying to figure out where we were going, but we forgot to leave any breadcrumbs behind. So there's no real clear path to, hey, here's how you become a CISO, here's how you do. They were making it up as they went along, and they were doing it out of necessity. And so if we don't take the time to invest back in to, and maybe it's formal mentoring, but maybe it's just encouraging somebody in, right? Or just sharing some of the knowledge, or we'll talk about tribal knowledge. But that next gen, if we're gonna be successful in this space, we need them, right? We have to be able to pull them in. And so those three things I think don't go away, right? So the fundamentals, the context, the next generation, those things are gonna be there. And they emerge in different ways, but we see that over and over and over again. So, and then we would love to have you be a part of us, right? Yeah. So if you're interested in being a guest, please reach out to us.
Specifically guests.
Yeah, if you'd like to talk
something to say, great. We'd love to listen. And as I said, we do allow people to promote whatever they want to promote. Absolutely. Even though we're part of a large organization, it's not about us, and it's certainly not about our product.
Yeah, we're very intentional.
A little bit about our product, but not as much as it needs to be.
Yeah. So. Well, in the early days when we were all locked down, to think of things. But you can find us everywhere. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on Google, we're on a ton of other platforms. And then if you want to catch us out on, I always like to call it Twitter because I want to have a good relationship with my ex. Some of you will get that, right? The handle @Paranoia. You can find us there. I'm also on Twitter as Robservatory, so I engage a whole lot more on that platform, but we'll do all sorts of stuff. But yeah, we would love to engage with you, love to talk further. Super fun. And thank you so much for taking time out today to come and hear us.
Yeah, thank you.
So any questions while we got a minute? Or
what episode would you recommend we listen to on the way home?
So the Ray Redacted one is amazing.
Ray Redacted is a great episode.
So Ray Redacted,
which is one of the more recent ones, yes.
It's season 5, episode 2 or 3.
Or even the one with Tanya.
In the one with Tanya. Tanya talks about security champions and inclusion. Both of those are amazing. If you're interested in election security or like regulations, data privacy, the season 1 with Darius Bennett is great. And then Michael Owens was season 2, I want to say like episode 8 or 9. So those are also some really, really good ones. And then we had a European panel, but I think Ray and Tanya are the ones that jump out to me right away in there. And then from a CISO perspective, the one we did with Matt Krause in that was season 2, like episode 3-ish or 4, something like that. And if you're a sports nut like me, the one with Steve Mason in season 1 is great. So I know I just gave you a lot of them, right? Which is like, what's your favorite? Yeah, what's your favorite? I have 17 of them, but yeah, Ray and Tanya from this year certainly jump right to the top of the list. Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.